character and process is really the key to success.
There's $77 billion of additional tax raising that's going to come.
This hasn't really been tax reform, it's been like tax gathering.
You're tuning in to The Property Couch, Australia's #1 property, finance and money podcast. Featuring the titans of the industry since 2015, we're trusted by tens of thousands of investors on their journey to financial peace. This show is powered by Moorr. Happy birthday to you.
Yes, thank you, Opti. It's our birthday. Woo! 600 episodes and counting. And what an episode we have for you today. I'm super excited. We love to do big episodes on our 600 or 100th episode, and today is no different. We have John McGrath, one of Australia's best known great goats real estate agents in the market. He is joining us for the very first time, so we get to talk to John, learn about his backstory in real estate, and then we have Tom Panos also joining us, where we talk about the budget bombshell, and of course we do talk about never wasting a crisis, because when there is obviously concern and uncertainty, it is potentially a good time for others to get into the market. So we have a jam-packed show. Obviously, I'm here in celebration mode with my funny little add-on. I want to talk about a couple of things from a factual point of view in terms of celebrating our 600 episode. Are you ready for this? 18.2 million downloads. Or if you go to some other places, it says we've had 30 million downloads. But we'll go to the conservative number and say 18.2 million. In 207 countries, people have listened to our show. We started in February of 2015 when the median house price in Australia was 442,500. And today it is 891,500. So that's a 98.55% increase over that time, or a CAGR, which is an annual capital growth rate return of 6.43. So not bad for those people who have been in the market. And of course, if you go back to episode 1, you know what we were about, and I feel like we've come full circle, and that is fixing bad property investment advice. And I feel like the next 6 months is all going to be about fixing some of the bad property investment advice that's been happening recently, or making sure you don't make a bad decision in terms of if you're thinking about investing in the market. So that is where I think the focus is. Obviously, I want to shout out Bryce. If you're listening, mate, we miss you, but thank you for being an amazing contributor for the bulk of those episodes. We're going to have Opti sort of also reel through some other fun facts at the end of the episode as well, so hang around for that. So thank you, Bryce. Thank you to our team behind the scenes. Obviously, we have Shayna, Ivis, Pat, and the team behind that, Ardit, Carmen, who obviously help pull all this together on a weekly basis. So thank you, everyone. There are also some really interesting facts in regards to how many hours and all of that. So again, stay tuned to the end of today's show to get that information. Now, we're going to cut to the interview that I did recently with John and Tom. It was filmed a week and a half ago, because they have their big AREC conference, which is Australian Real Estate Conference, which is incredible, up on the Gold Coast. So we got them just before that time. They are very busy men in understanding that. So couple of housekeeping things, because there is some really important housekeeping messages that I want to share with you. The first one is obviously tax planning. It's very close now, so we want to make sure if you haven't done your pre-30 tax planning, if you've got any questions, go to the Property Couch /tax. So that's the new website also. We're celebrating that new website. And don't forget to do the quiz on the new Property Couch website. If you haven't checked it out, do so. It's a very quick quiz, and it allows us to then tailor some of the communication to you around, how you get the best value, because I'm not sure you have time to listen to. Obviously, there's 600 prime shows, but there are other shows that we also have. Now, the final important message before we cut to the interview with John and Tom, we have a brand new negative gearing calculator. So with all the new, hopefully legislated changes, you can now go onto the Moorr platform, and this is the web version, not the mobile. Go onto the web version, and we have a calculator there. Now that calculator will explain to you about the the current settings, so you can flick between negative gearing and then non-negative gearing, because remember, it's now a deferred benefit. The benefit itself overall has not been lost, so you can understand the cash flow implications. And also it has a very, very cool side-by-side comparison. So you can actually look at different performances of different assets. You can look at different loan-to-value ratios, and it's dynamic. The charts work beautifully. So it really is an excellent way in which you can start to understand the implications and the ramifications of these new negative gearing tax policy changes. So check that out on Moorr. It's free to download. Go to moorr.com.au and then obviously create an account if you're on desktop and web version. And of course you can download the mobile version, but that doesn't have the negative gearing calculator, only the web version, because we needed to get up quickly for our wonderful community. All right, John McGrath. John is absolutely synonymous with the real estate industry. He's someone who has done an incredible, great job in terms of professionalising our industry. He has obviously the McGrath real estate chain, which is all up and down the East Coast. And he really is just a legend of our industry. So the first part of this interview is John and I going one-on-one, and then we have Tom coming on to talk about some of the changes that were announced by the government and what's potentially going to happen to property markets. So for our 600th episode, here is John McGrath and Tom Panos. And what a privilege and absolute honour it is to be speaking to one of the goats of the real estate industry here today for our 600th episode. I can't be any more excited than to introduce you to John McGrath. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, if you don't know who John McGrath is in real estate, there is something wrong. He is the founder and CEO of McGrath Real Estates. He started at the age of 24. He began with a very small office in the Paddington agency, and he's grown it into one of Australia's largest residential real estate groups with company turnover in excess of $5.9 billion. He's also an amazing best-selling author. He produces the annual McGrath Report, and he's one of Australia's, and this is most important for everyone who listens, most trusted property voices, because there are plenty of other property voices in our industry, some a lot louder than others, but John is definitely a go-to when you want really intelligent conversation and thought leadership in this space. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here on such an important 600th, and I think we were chatting off air that we started our podcast at a similar time, and when Tom joins us, I'm going to ask him why we're only up to 250. So there's a problem there, but you're a long way ahead. So congratulations to you and Bryce on the great education and information you provide. And thank you for having me.
Oh, well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. And so we want to get to know a little bit more about who John McGrath is. And we'll talk obviously on the property side. But like what we do with all of our very important guests on the show, we like to start with a simple question around the money and money conversations that you were having when you were growing up. And did you have certain conversations around, the understanding of money around the dinner table when you were growing up, John?
Not so much. Like a lot of listeners and a lot of Australians, I grew up in a family where my parents had separated at a young age. So we grew up in a suburb of Sydney called Bexley, which is kind of a sort of a working class suburb near the airport.
Yep.
And, at a very young age, my father and mother separated, so we were still living apart. And I was not that interested in really either money or business in the early days. I was a good sportsman, and I was very interested in becoming the best in sport. And I guess in the back of my mind, Ben, somewhere, I probably thought if I got really, really good at sport, that would be my living and career. But in terms of, I guess, where the company is today and where I've found myself, it's probably very different from where I thought I might have been as a child or as a teenager.
So we've jumped straight into the NRL or the rugby league stuff. You're a famous Rabbitohs man, and you were obviously a very promising player in your juniors. Tell us what happened there in regards to the pivot that you had to make.
Yeah, so I was a very good sports person at school, and I was playing both rugby union and rugby league, but I felt that rugby league was probably the area that I could make a career out of because I wasn't doing well at school, and I was doing well at sport. So I never saw myself getting into any form of academic or higher education. And rather than just doing sort of more of a trade style work, I thought, well, I'll get into football. You've got to remember, Ben, back in those days, footballers weren't paid much like today. Most of them had a full-time job, and then they trained after hours and played on the weekend. So it wasn't ever a career path that was likely to make me a fortune, but it was one that I was very good at and I loved. So that was my destiny. And when I left school, I immediately had collapsed lungs through playing sport. So I was playing football on a Friday evening, and the next day my lungs had collapsed as a result of an impact the night before. And so I went to the hospital, and they said, well, you need to get your lungs reinflated, and they did it virtually on the spot, same day. And a few weeks later, it collapsed again. So it was a more serious issue. Next time round, I needed an operation. And I remember saying to the doctor when I was recovering, because I should have asked him before, it wouldn't have changed my trajectory, but I said, how long before I can train again? And he said, well, in a few weeks' time, you can start walking and then jogging. And, if you want to get back to the gym, leave it for a month or two. And I said, what about playing football? And he looked at me, and I remember kind of as one of those sliding doors moments. And he said, you can't play body contact sport again. He said a few things. I couldn't scuba dive and I couldn't skydive, which didn't worry me because I'm afraid of heights. I'm afraid of sharks. So they didn't worry me. But never playing sport again was truly a change in my trajectory. And it was then, and I'd actually started doing real estate as my kind of day job while I was hoping to be a Australian football player. So I thought, well, I have to put all my eggs in the real estate basket now because sport was no longer an option. And so, I mean, I was committed to real estate before then, but it was kind of a side hustle for me in my own mind anyway, or something that I'd do whilst I was waiting to play on Saturday. So, that was how, I got into it through happenstance. And it's funny, Ben, because you listen to people talk about, it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond. And I guess for me, as I look back, and I'm delighted, and maybe I could have played for Australia, maybe I couldn't have, but most elite footballers didn't earn much money in those days, and they retired by 28 or 30 if they were lucky, if they didn't get injured. Yeah. So I look at it now, and I'm now 62, and I've been in a career since I was 18, 19, and I love every day, and it's certainly been a good provider for me and the family. And it's been a pleasure to go to work every day. I was coaching a team yesterday at Parramatta, and I just said, I'm sick and tired of these real estate agents that sort of act like, it's such a hard and, dutiful job. And I just think, we get to show interesting people, interesting properties. We're out and about. We're in the community. We're helping people realize their dreams. And some real estate agents try and make it sound like it's an arduous task. And I've never seen it that way, Ben. I've always found it a pleasure and an honour. And I say an honour because people give us the key to their house when we're selling their property, and they don't give anyone else generally on planet Earth the key to their house, and they're trusting us to maximise their outcome. And for most people, as you would know, a home and a property as an asset is people, whether it's their home or investment, it's their biggest asset.
Absolutely. So you said you came into real estate by happenstance. Can you share a little bit about that connection? Obviously, again, your school and sort of your education focus at that time was obviously on sport. Yeah. How did that happenstance moment occur?
So, before I got into real estate, I did the HSC, and I got 95 out of 500, which is one of the worst marks, I'm sure, in recorded history. Yeah. And there was literally I went down to a careers advisory centre in Surrey Hills, and I asked them, what are my career options? And they looked at my HSC, and they basically said politely, not very many here, but here's a book of A to Z. And I literally just went through it, and I stopped at real estate, and I thought about it, and had a job description, what it's about, how do you get in. Didn't need an HSC or a good HSC mark, which was a prerequisite for me at that stage. So I enrolled in Randwick TAFE soon after, and I did 3 nights a week, 2 nights real estate, 1 night auctioneering, and I got a job as a letting clerk, as we used to call it, I guess a leasing consultant today people might call it. And so I did that, and when I had the injury, which was soon after, I decided I had to make this work. And so, I really doubled down, and I thought about what am I going to do. And I remember I had a foolscap, a white foolscap pad And I remember writing down like my little first business plan. And one of the things I wrote was I'm going to give everyone the best service experience of their life, because I thought, well, that's a pretty good start in the service industry, is be remarkable. And, then I started writing. I was going to work 7 days a week, 7 till 7, kind of had a nice sound to it. And I hadn't, no commitments, no kids, no relationships. So I really had nothing else except to throw myself into real estate. And I found that when you did that and you studied hard, and soon thereafter, unlike school, which I found hard, I wasn't stupid, but I wasn't studious. And, I was doing all my work at the gym, and I'd skip too many classes and crazy stuff like that. So I really struggled at school. But when I got into real estate and I'd go to tech at night or Randwick TAFE, I found I was fascinated at what I was learning, and I was putting it into practice the next day. And it was actually
practical application of it. Yeah.
correct. And I absolutely loved it. So, long story short, I did 2 years as a rental clerk and letting clerk. And then I got into sales at age 20. And then I started McGrath at age 24. Probably definitely undercapitalized, under life experience, under real estate experience. But I was doing very well in sales. And I thought, well, how hard can it be to run a business? It actually ended up being a lot harder than I thought, to be fair. But, so I did that, and I started the business, and about 18 months into it, I nearly went broke. And I remember I used to go every year to a conference in America, and it was that year I was in the Moscone Center in San Francisco, and I remember I'd virtually unpacked my bags, arrived. The conference was the next day, and my accountant, Stephen Jones, at the time, rang me. And he said, we got a problem. He said, I don't think we're going to make wages next week. We need to, really. Now, that wasn't because we weren't selling a lot. We were actually doing quite nicely, but it was because I didn't understand cash flow. A sale doesn't equal cash. And the cost of running a business was probably greater than I thought. I wasn't keeping my eyes on the dollars. I was just keeping my eyes on running the business in terms of sales. And so I went the next day to the conference. I got on the plane the next night. I cut my trip short. And I bought a tiny little terrace house in Paddington, and I made arrangements to sell it. He spoke to the bank on my behalf. He said, look, we need you to give us some funding for the next month while he sells his property. And that was it. So again, it's not what happens to you, it's how you deal with it. So that was another great life lesson, which at the time I wish I didn't have to go through, because it was very painful. But I learned that, I got to learn the business. I have to be competent on the numbers, not just the sales side. And then soon, at some point, a few years later, I was able to hire the right people to surround me with. But that was kind of my initial trajectory from a bad HSC mark, got me into real estate, and then a problem with my lungs got me out of sport. And then I had to double down on real estate. And, 40 odd years later, I'm delighted.
And you became a very good student of your craft. I remember reading an article about how you fastidiously studied world's best practice from some of the most successful. So if you want success, practice and follow the principles of some of the best agents. And I know in some of your books you've referred to, that type of work. So what gave you the clue to do that? I mean, who were the sort of mentors or what drove that mindset for you to want to explore that and be the best version of yourself?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's because, again, I put this down to the benefit of getting a bad HSC mark. I didn't go through a traditional route of learning business, and I'm not criticising it. I'm sure universities and business schools offer great insights to their people, but I kind of had to learn from School of Life, and so I signed up for every seminar that I could get to, and there was no Zoom or Teams in those days, of course.
No.
You had to wait till someone came to town because Australia wasn't doing them. There was no ARIC as we see it today. So, I had to wait till Tom Hopkins came to town, and then one day down the track, Tony Robbins came to town, and they weren't necessarily traditional business, but they were about life learning. And I found that if you can really choose the best version of yourself every day and become an excellent student at whatever is in front of you, you didn't need as much the technical skills of running a business, because I soon found out it was just about people. And if you could develop a knack, and from being a competent salesperson at that point, Ben, I was able to, sort of in recruitment, I was able to sell the benefits of us working together as well. And I was able to sort of, get our team aligned and excited about the future. I was able to sell the future vision. So I guess I just did those things, and by that stage, I was able to fortunately start affording to buy myself, some better talent. A general manager and an accountant, then one day a financial controller, and so forth. So it was all sort of pretty organic, and as you said, little office in Paddington, and I set up in Paddington for one reason, Ben, because one was it was an area that I aspired to own a house in and live in, and I thought I would love to be in this area. And secondly, is there was such a density of property. They were average 12, 13 feet in the old language wide, and they were turning over quite quickly because the long-standing migrant community of Paddington was starting to move out. The gay community that made Paddington famous and fabulous moved in, and they were renovating and selling and flipping houses. So you had this high density of 12 and 13-foot wide terraces.
Clever.
That were a really interesting community, and they were turning over, every sort of 4 or 5 years. So for me, and it wasn't that expensive in Paddington back in those days, but it was sort of on the up. So that was sort of the way I started there. And then I found that as I gave people great service experience and I was getting really good results for my clients, word travels. Then someone that bought a Paddington terrace lived in Bondi Beach, which, by the way, in those days was not popular. It was
No, it wasn't as popular as it is today.
No, nowhere near. In fact, wasn't popular at all. But they'd say, look, we've got this unit, we're going to sell, we've really enjoyed working with you. Would you come to Bondi? And I just found that, and it's still my I guess my principle today, that if you give everyone an extraordinary experience, your word of mouth just follows you around. And that was how the business started. And then, I felt I had to open a second office, which we opened on the Lower North Shore, because we were starting to get a lot of call-ins from the Lower North Shore. And I thought, well, that would be our next one. Then we opened at the Inner West, and we've got 100 and nearly 70 offices today.
Yes. And it's interesting, right? Because on your great podcast, and if anyone's interested in terms of in that sales industry or whatever, I love what you, Tom, and Troy do in regards to some of the coachings and observations that you do. One of the ones that, when I was listening earlier on, you talk a lot about, what's your advantage in the market. So you have an example of a new agent coming into a market versus and competing with an established agent in the market. And you talk about energy and application and attention is potentially the competitive advantage for the new person, because I can dedicate my time to you versus obviously the experienced agent in the area that you're trying to eventually become. Take us through, some of that sort of dialogues that you're having with people around setting mindset, because our podcast and what you do is all about aspiration and being, again, the best version of yourself. Take us through, some of the dialogues that you'll be talking to people about, because at some point in time there is some advantage that you've got, and I think you're a brilliant orator in terms of trying to identify what those are and then double click on them to get people to understand the value you bring to the table.
Thank you. So I thank you. I always talk to our team about character and process is really the key to success. That if you develop the right character, and that's generally what gives people the experience from you, how you are, who you are, how you make them feel, that's critical. So I talk about that. But processes, they don't want to just feel good. They want to get a great result in our industry, in your industry, in everyone's industry. They want to get a great result. So I say you've got to bring the two halves together, because there's definitely charismatic people that are terrible on process, and there's definitely process people that haven't evolved their character sufficiently. So you kind of bring the two halves together. And therefore, and I just say, it's like, how can you you got to make people feel special, and you've got to get great results. So simultaneously, it's no good just doing one of the two. You need to do the two. So I sort of coach our team about, how do you make someone feel great? And I remember a long time ago reading, and I forget where it was, might have been Flight Centre, but someone said every time a customer walks in, they were taught that make me feel important is tattooed across their forehead. And how can one make you feel important? Critical. And then we talk about make it easy for people to do business with you. That's really critical. So little things you can do to make it easy. So we're always focused on making people feel important, making it easy, and then delivering them a superior result. So I think that in most instances, and I know a lot of people are talking about technology today, and that's valid as a way to expand your business and leverage it. But I still think it's the people, the human element, certainly for the moment anyway, that is going to generally be the point of difference. If I meet a real estate agent, in fact, if I'm looking for a property to sell, I'm probably thinking of selling a property as well as buying. If I go into the field on a Saturday in most areas, I can meet a dozen agents. And who's the one that I remember? Who's the one that follows me up with professional questions? Who's the one that delivers on the promises as to what they're going to do for me? Who's the one that I feel I actually want to take this relationship further? And so I think it's really critical. And the beauty for us is it's not about having a 10-year education or a 10-year internship. It's about you can turn up to this industry and be extraordinarily focused on doing a small number of things really well, getting the 1%ers right, and giving people a great service experience and delivering great results. And to be frank, I think people hear a lot about real estate agents and the money they earn and all the rest. I think the industry has got a lot of mediocrity in it, and I'm sure a lot of consumers would agree with me. There are some great agents, and I think we have a lot of great agents, and I know some of our competitors also have some great agents, but it's the minority. The amount of product knowledge that's lacking. When I started, as I mentioned, Ben, I was 20 years of age, and I was intimidated because Di Jones was my major competitor, and her brand lives on today, but she passed away a number of years ago. And Di was probably in her 40s. She had life experience. She had a family. She was very good at real estate. And therefore, to become really successful in that market, I had to be better than her. So she became my benchmark, and she was one of the best agents, I think, in the history of Australia. So the way I thought I could best do it, I couldn't, outperform her on life experience or real estate sales experience. I looked at product knowledge, and I thought, if I get to know this community, this market, everything better than anyone else, that would give me an enormous amount of confidence. So you mentioned it before, I studied it like a Harvard business degree, the market, valuations, auctions, dialogue, communications, all those sort of things. And that was one of the things that gave me the confidence. So I think if anyone's listening out there and they're kind of looking for a point of difference, start with product knowledge, develop an extraordinary product knowledge, then bolt that to the fact that you develop an expertise in making people feel good about it, and you're bringing those two things together. And the other thing is, the first listing I ever went to, it was in 8 Albert Square, Paddington. And our company had it listed, and I went there to look at it because I was brand new and I wanted to look at all our listings. And I said to her, "How's the experience been?" And she said, "Terrible." And I felt, gee, that's not what I was hoping to hear.
Yeah.
"Do you want to sit down and have a cup of tea?" Because she said, "No one seems to be interested." And I said, "I'd love to." And we sat down, and she said, "Communication, John, you're a young fella getting into the game." She said, "I never hear from anyone." She said, "They were all over me the day that was listed for a week or two." And then she said, "It's been on the market for 2 months. I don't hear from anyone. I don't know what's going." And she said, "Communication." So from that moment, and this is where my education, I heard stuff, then I made common sense decisions. So I thought at that moment, I'm going to ring from my first vendor. And at that point, I didn't even have a vendor. I'm going to ring all my vendors every day, and I'll give them a daily update, and I'm going to quarantine the first hour of every day. I mean, originally it was the first 5 minutes because I only had one vendor, but as I grew my listings database, I was getting more clients, and I'd spend an hour or an hour and a half just letting everyone know what had happened, where we're at, what I'm thinking, what recommendations I have for them and their property. And I found that was a part of giving people control and confidence in the process. Whereas a lot of agents, their communication strategies, when I've got some good news, I'll call you. And of course, that could be weeks. So then I've lost confidence because I don't even know if you're doing anything.
Yeah.
So that was it was a combination of seminars, books, common sense, listening to people, occasionally getting to meet an icon of either real estate or business, and then just developing mentors from afar. Steve Jobs, obviously I never got to meet him, but I studied him and I was inspired by him. So you don't have to meet your mentors. Sometimes you just learn about them, and it's never been easier than today. It's YouTube, it's podcasts like yours, and there's so many different ways that you can learn about success from a distance. So there's no excuse anymore.
There isn't, and I'm so thrilled to have you on as our 600th episode special guest, because, I mean, in just what you just said then is what everyone should understand, that if you are in the services businesses, you're in the people business. And as part about being in the people business, potentially there's emotional attachment to that, and especially with real estate and finance. So if you're not communicating, like you say, on a regular basis, and if you're not a subject matter expert in terms of that information, because I'm going to get answers from AI now, and I'm going to get all of those other things. But at the end of the day, it is a trust story, and that's also, why I've got so much respect for you, because obviously, you've been consistent with your messaging. You've been really honest in terms of calling out the good, the bad, the ugly in the industry. And that's why, if anyone wants to study all the stuff that John's done, he's got these 3 great books: The Ultimate Guide to Real Estate, which was the 2005 version. That has been sort of upgraded. You don't have to be born brilliant. So in other words, you're teaching people about this ability that you can get these learned skills. Like it's, they're not naturally gifted in them. And of course, the latest one you've got, which is the Your Inc., which is basically, the branding that you do for yourself. And I think that is also really important. And John, I would love to talk to you for the whole day, but we do have Tom Panos waiting, but I'm going to get a couple of quick questions. It's going to bring you both on to talk about the budget and obviously what we think about that. But in your recent report, your 2026 report, you were talking about, some of the changes that were happening in the market around lifestyle. So in terms of if you can give us a couple of insights into your 2026 McGrath report about the demographic shifts and what's happening from a behavioural point of view, I think that might be a nice little segue for us to then introduce Tom into the conversation, and we'll talk more about the market.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously there's been a few changes, and AI is the one that's upon us right now, but the internet and realestate.com and domain and those big portals has been one of the biggest changes. And more recently, we had the tragic COVID situation, which was horrific for many, many, many people. But I think when you combine the internet and the COVID experience, one of the things we've found is that lifestyle regional locations and people working from home have become much more popular and prevalent than ever before. So once upon a time, if you worked in the Sydney CBD, you had to live within a short ride or train trip or walk to get there. Now there's a lot of people, especially in industries and doing stuff like you and I sometimes do, which is digital and can be done remotely, where people can now live on the Central Coast, come to the Sydney one day a week and work remotely in other times. I mean, our whole finance team, most of them work from home remotely as we speak. So I think that pockets of locations, especially where there's been infrastructure developed to make them easily accessible, and I just mentioned the Central Coast. I mean, Central Coast has never been closer to Sydney than it is today. I mean, commuting is, I say to people, they say, Central Coast, and I say, well, it's 2 podcasts away. Or it's 5 phone calls away. I'll make
a very comfortable train trip. Yeah.
That's right. So I think that's really interesting, and I think it's unlocked a lot of pockets. And I think if you're an astute investor looking for some value, I think there's more value to be had now, and it's accessible. And areas that once probably had very little chance of strong growth in the future now have terrific opportunities. So I think, the work from home, the lifestyle markets, I know Knight Frank, who's our business partner now, they've just released a wealth report as we're speaking. They're doing a global tour coming to Australia next week. And they've been talking about the boom of high net worth, ultra high net worth, actually, individuals. And Australia ranks as the 4th fastest growing area in the globe for ultra high net worth individuals. So again, what does that mean? That means that a lot of money is going to find itself back into property. A lot of it will find itself into the uber premium stuff, but there's also going to be lifestyle stuff that people are looking for. So I think, get on the internet, go to your favorite portal, have a look around, educate yourself through, podcasts like yours and others that are out there. And I think it's an exciting time for investors, and it's also an exciting time because people, once upon a time, you were born in Concord and you'd probably die in Concord, and you moved within the suburb. Now people are moving all around and they're experiencing different lifestyles and different opportunities. And I think that's an exciting part of real estate today and what the internet has unlocked for people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we talk about satellite cities and commutables like what you're doing, and people paying a premium for convenience and lifestyle as part of that, and the scarcity associated with that. So, okay, John, well, I now think it's time to bring in one of your, co-mates on the $1 Million Agent podcast, and that is obviously someone else who's synonymous with Australian real estate. And Tom's been on the show a couple of times, but welcome, Tom Panos.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Now, gentlemen, we saw a couple of weeks ago that the federal government released some significant changes into the property market in regards to property tax reform. And I wanted to obviously get your opinions in regards to what you're seeing there. So let's start firstly with, what's been the initial mood and response from the initial conversations that you've been having in this space. And then I think we can start to unpack where we think those behaviours and so forth might go. So, John, if I could start with you, what's been the initial response from your agents and from some of the people and consumers that you might be talking to?
Ben, I think everyone hates change and they look at the worst. And I don't know whether it's fortunate, but I was certainly around in 1985 when the original capital gains tax came in, and people were saying this is the end of property investment. No one's going to buy property anymore. And of course, since then, generations have founded most of their wealth on property. And I think there'll be a little bit of the doom and gloom. There has been already. A lot of people are looking at the downside. But I heard and look, I think some of the legislation and the detail is still being worked out as we speak. But I heard someone do a hypothetical the other day about a property you bought for $1 million and sold 5 or 6 years later for $1.5 million, and how that would work with capital gains tax. And I think it was like a $15,000 to $20,000 differential in what you would have paid the day before versus the day after the announcement, which is, that's a fair chunk of change, but over a $500,000 growth, maybe it's not the end of the world. So I do think we'll probably start for the initial period for the first, couple of months until this sorts out and then people get used to it. There'll be some negativity. I think for most people, property has been the backbone of building family wealth, generational wealth in this country. And I think it will continue to be so. And from time to time, governments will bring in different changes. And this one's obviously, I guess, designed to try and bring some more money into the government, but also try and make first home ownership more available. And so, whether it does that or not, I guess we'll find out. But I think it's also we can talk about it later, I think it'll push rents up as well, because if the investor pool does narrow down a bit, which I think is probably at least a short-term reaction to this, that's going to push an already highly inflated, well, not inflated, inflamed probably, rental market to even newer heights. But I don't know, Tommy.
Well, that's right. I mean, ultimately, the budget forecast 35,000 less properties being built, and I don't know how they came up with only $2 a week in additional rental increase, and potentially 75,000 new first home buyers coming in over the decade. Tom, you've obviously been quite vocal, as you know have I, in terms of your concern around these reforms. Now that we know roughly what's on the table, and it's still got to be formally legislated and so forth, and we're still ironing out some of those details, what are you thinking about now? That you sort of had time to digest a little bit of it.
Well, real estate agents are telling me that the principal place of residence has just become even more attractive than ever, and it has been a vehicle. And John will know it, and you'll know it, Ben. 2000, 2001, those years there, it was common in the eastern suburbs. People bought properties, they added value to them, and they were tax-free after a year. And all of a sudden, blue chip suburbs are going to actually benefit out of what happened a week or 2 weeks ago. I also think to myself that people that own big blocks of land, because let's face it, developers have been the big winners. So if you've got land that can be a duplex site, subdividable, all those, land is the seed that developers need to actually build. So all of a sudden that becomes attractive. I think where some of the people may not get the growth that they used to have, and we spoke about this yesterday, Ben, is investors that had used negative gearing as their key strategy for their cash flow, and they were buying lots of cheapies in a lot of regional Australia. Now, I'm not saying regional Australia is going to collapse.
No.
But what I'm saying is the growth that it had, because it was fueled by a lot of investors who were using negative gearing to be able to buy the third and the fourth and the fifth, and they had buyers agents that, operated in that space. I think the numbers don't stack up without negative gearing anymore. So overall, Ben, I've got to say, it's not too bad, right? It's not too bad. And the truth is that grandfathering still exists. I actually do feel that out of everything, it was the delivery of the budget which assumed that Aussies aren't as smart as what they think we are. Like, we know this hasn't really been tax reform. It's been like tax gathering. It's not like this extra money that's going to be collected is going back into people's pay packet. In fact, I actually just I actually stayed up the night of the budget by accident, because I'd done what John had done once and I had sinus and I took the daytime tablets. So I couldn't sleep. So I thought to myself, what am I going to actually do? I just sat there and just read everything. And I've got to say, it is not too bad. The only thing I'm going to say is that giving people $5 a week in their pay packet, that starts in a year's time. Like $5 a week. This coffee at the airport, I picked that up, was $8.90. It's $5 going to pay you like half a cup of coffee. It's neither here nor there. I just think for young people, they would have expected a little bit more out of that budget.
Yeah, I mean, we've when Bryce and I sort of diagnosed the initial sort of policy settings, it's very clear that we would all agree that bringing down, sort of exertion income, PAYG salary income, we do need to get our tax settings lower, because at the end of the day, that is it's a drag on younger people being able to get ahead. And I think you're hearing a lot more commentary from Jim Chalmers and the Labor Party to say, there's $77 billion of additional tax raising that's going to come from these policies. So as people start to adjust their affairs and so forth. Now, so we would expect that you're going to see, PAYG tax installment, settings coming down lower. So that's good. So more into every consumer's hands. That obviously does improve borrowing capacity. So borrowing capacity then potentially gets you into the game and into the market that you want to get into. So I think more longer term, it's really clear what all the economists and all of the people who study this stuff like myself wanted was, we wanted to see lower taxes on our incomes, right, on our exertion income. But what we got was higher taxes on our asset and our wealth rather than them coming down. So let's hope that they can potentially adjust that a little bit more. And I think,
Ben, in some ways, like if you think about it, we talk about intergenerational wealth. In many ways, one would argue that essentially what's happened on budget night is you're at a nightclub and the bouncer has basically said, hey, you own property before this date, you can keep negative gearing. You're not coming in. So in many ways, the wealthy are still getting the benefits of the negative gearing and retaining the 50% capital gains tax discount, whereas it's the new people that won't. But I also think project marketing all of a sudden becomes attractive. And you might find that some, even real estate agents, I've already had conversations with a few agents, they're sort of saying to themselves, hey, this might be an opportunity. And project marketing is a different skill set to selling existing residential real estate, which is what John and I mainly talk about in the podcast and at our training and conferences. Our people are generally residential real estate agents, but the opportunity is going to be there. And project marketers, it's a unique field, and there's a great opportunity there because they've got to understand a lot more about taxation implications, but they've also got to influence, because they're not giving someone a brick saying, this is the kitchen you're getting. They're actually giving them a concept. This is what it's going to look like. So I think there is an opportunity for intelligent people in the business to move towards project marketing and development.
And John, I want to pick up on what Tom was saying a little bit earlier there about, the government's selling this as a intergenerational inequality adjustment there, and they believe it's going to increase the number of first-home buyers. The question for you is, I mean, Australians have a love affair for property, right? And really well-located property comes at a premium. There's always demand on it. It's got scarce elements to it. Is that the dream that's really going to occur across Australia, or will there be markets where getting into the property market will be a little bit more affordable, i.e. regional towns, because there may be less demand in those areas, but potentially in our signature international cities where wealth and attractions to be in those centres. Yeah. How do you sort of dissect that and think about that conceptually around the ability for first home buyers to be able to get into the market and adjust their expectations in terms of the types of properties that they're going to be able to buy. I mean, it's not going to allow them to get, that 2-bedroom semi 300 metres from Bondi Beach, right? So take us through how you think about that generally with these new settings.
Well, you're right, Ben. It's going to adjust not just the types of property, but the locations of the property. As I mentioned before, COVID had also played a part in that, having people look further afield for lifestyle reasons, but also for affordability reasons. And again, I use the Sydney example, 90 minutes out of Sydney on the Central Coast and the South Coast and the Blue Mountains, there's some wonderful property that's much more affordable than in the city. So I think the dream of sort of starting with a quarter-acre block or even a house in inner Sydney is gone for almost anyone. Even, dual income, it's very hard because you're spending, several million to get, a modest cottage nowadays in inner Sydney. So that's difficult. But, we've certainly seen a lot of children, kids, people staying at home a lot longer to allow them to get into the market. So people are very resilient, clever, creative and flexible. And I think when all this sort of started happening, people said, okay, well, I'll stay at home for another 3 years. I'll get a buddy in, or I'll buy a property. I'll get a couple of flatmates in. A lot of things, and, that may not have been their plan A, but they've pivoted to a plan B. So I think that people are now focused on strata as their stepping stone into the market, which is good. And there's a lot of great units being built out there, and new units have got some advantages over established at the moment. So there's a lot of good quality units being built. So that's one. Two is, a lot of people are renting in the city or staying at home longer, and they're buying up at Central Coast. And now with, rail links and infrastructure and roadways, Central Coast, as we said before, it's 2 or 3 podcasts away from the city. And a lot of people now are finding it, they can commute, travel once or twice a week and work from home 3 times a week and live in God's country, up at Central Coast. So it's sort of, I think people are adapting their buying habits, and there's no way in the world that people can't get in. I've heard these dramatic statements, there's a generation that won't be able to buy property. That's not the case. People have just got to be a bit more creative and a bit flexible. You can still buy a good property, get yourself. The hardest one, of course, as we all know, is first rung of the ladder, getting your first property. Once you've got that, it generally gets easy. You've got rent to help subsidise it. Your wage is probably going to go up. You might get married or bring a second income into the family household. So, it's just helping people get that first rung on the ladder. And some of the government initiatives have worked particularly well to help that happen as well.
And Tom and John, have you given any thought to, there's some discussions that we're having in our business, and Bryce and I are sort of running through some scenarios where you might have sort of 2-tier markets, like ultimately if a property is being sold with the ability to have negative gearing and also a future capital gains 50% exemption on them. So have you given any thought to concentration risk? Because in reality, it's easy to build lots of new homes, house and land packages on the fringes of the city in new subdivisions. And it's also pretty easy to build multi-density, high-rise in areas where the zoning allows for medium and high density. And so you potentially get a concentration of this new stock. Do you then think about that, and then you think about maybe the sort of middle suburbia, which could potentially be hollowed out because of, from a rental point of view, because you just can't bring the volume into those areas. So when someone might be doing a knockdown duplex and it does have the ability to be negatively geared, do you think that property might sell at a premium? Have you given sort of any thought to those types of nuances that can happen in, with these types of settings?
I'll just add my comments and then we'll hand over to John. There's no evidence in the last 2 weeks of a pattern emerging, right? And I'm thinking back to when I was in real estate in the late 80s, where we had the we'd ask people, was it pre-1985? John, if you remember, the conversation would come up about capital gains tax because there's no capital gains tax pre-85, right? So that would come up. The only thing I'm going to say, Ben, is that look, and we didn't touch on it before, there is a cohort of people that I call the rent investors, the young people. And I look at some of my daughter's friends and these people rent closer to town where they want to live, Redfern, Surrey Hills, what have you. And then what they do is they end up, investing in a property out west, I don't know, in St. Mary's or, on the Central Coast. That negative gearing benefit is gone, right?
Yeah.
So that may affect the behaviour of where these people live. So they're my comments on that. I don't know, John, what you think.
Yeah, look, the market's pretty efficient, and it'll find developers nowadays. They're clued into where the demand is, and they're aware of concentration risk, even for them. I mean, if you're a developer putting up new stock in an area that's already got an abundance of it, it's not going to be a particularly successful development. And I think buyers are pretty savvy as well. They avoid these sort of home unit kind of massive concentration if they can. So I think the market will, over time, Ben, just find its efficient way around. Data is now readily available by consumers, developers, buyers, sellers, everyone. So I think it'll round itself off, and I think we'll be fine.
So, gents, obviously what we did get was some good news around grandfathering, potentially of negative gearing. So that could have been catastrophic in terms of a run on the market and destroying a lot of value that's in real estate. But we did see some slight changes in terms of the capital gains tax with respect of a deadline and a transition period. So did it please you that we got the negative gearing benefit, John?
Look, yes. The answer is there were some things that I thought were better than we expected. I think a lot of it had been leaked, I'm sure on purpose for, sort of the weeks leading up to it. So I think that, we knew what was going to come, and we pretty much got what we expected, with maybe a couple of things that were a bit better. There wasn't too many things in there that were much worse than I expected. But I do get frustrated because, property has been the asset and the way in which almost every Australian that we know, certainly all our generations above us, parents, have made their wealth. And they've actually got ahead. They haven't got ahead through their pay-as-you-go wages generally. That's just allowed them to live week to week. But those that were fortunate enough to establish a property and have seen it double every 7 to 10 years have really enjoyed the benefit of that. And on the contrary, we've seen what's happened in Victoria and Melbourne, one of the world's greatest cities in particular, but the whole of Victoria has been hit very hard by poor government decisions on overtaxing property as an asset. So my overarching comment is be careful you don't kill the golden goose, because property has kept this country running for generations. But I guess, these are unusual times, and they had to find some way of getting some more money back in the coffers and trying to help the affordability for young people. So if it achieves those two efforts, I'm sure there'll be some benefit to all of us.
Tom?
Look, I would have thought, as John said, by the night of the budget, we sort of knew that they were getting rid of capital gains and negative gearing. Like, there had been just too many articles in the press. What did surprise me is that it was being positioned as the most ambitious budget in 2-3 decades, and they were making comparisons to Paul Keating, particularly the fact that Chalmers has got him as his superhero. And I was very surprised in the end, it wasn't really reform. It was just actually more like tax collecting. It wasn't actually reform. I would have thought to myself, they would have potentially have said, you know what, interest rates are a very blunt instrument and they're not helping us. So we're actually going to change a bit of the tax legislation. We're going to actually, like, we know that wealthy people keep spending, driving inflation up. We might increase GST on the behaviour of those people. I would have thought to myself there was a chance to do reform, but there was none of that. So it wasn't really a budget of reform. It was basically a budget of tax redirection of money with the view of getting people in property to subsidise where they've spent money elsewhere. But we did not see true reform in that budget. So that did surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of criticism around, to your point you were saying before about being in the nightclub, and, the ones who've been able to build that wealth, to John's point, around, 53% of household wealth is caught in their home, right? And so we now know owner-occupier appeal and that land and where people want to live and put roots down is going to attract a premium in those particular areas. So we've got this goose that lays the golden egg, to John's point. And then, unfortunately, the younger generation aren't going to potentially have the upside that we've been able to enjoy, because if they're going to be putting money into shares, they're going to be hit with a higher tax on the wealth that they create there, which is the deposit to get them on the ladder. And we all know that obviously that first deposit for that first home is the hardest step in the dance these days. But once you get onto the dance floor and you want to move closer to the DJ and your forever home, that's the journey that these people have to go on, and it's a journey that all of us did have to go on. And I don't want to make it sound like it's not easier or harder for them than it is for us. The deposit has definitely grown in size in terms of what they have to do. So, but my read and what I've shared with you guys is this idea conceptually around having these changes happen when they did. Was that all they could have done? Could they have done something on the edges around speculated investors and stop that, and stop the run in the regional markets that were caused by people trading property and this next generation of people not really adding social good? Because at the end of the day, a long-term property investor should be holding the asset and giving safe and quiet enjoyment of their tenants and enjoying the asset that you provided for them. And it adds to the social good, because the point being is, if we get a reduction in rental stock, then the government's going to be forced to potentially have to raise taxes to build a lot more public and social housing. So it's really about these unintended consequences that we've got to think about. So we'll see how that plays out.
So Ben, yes. I was going to add, it's funny, I had a interesting conversation with someone today who is in their late 20s, and they actually said, did you buy an investment property when you were younger? And I said, I did. And he goes, so you benefited? I said, yeah. He goes, why'd you buy it? I said, very simple. I said, I bought it because I didn't want to pay as much tax, because I actually felt that this would help me pay less tax. It was a strategy. So if you think about it, gentlemen, if you're a person in your 20s or even your 30s and you're working hard, whether you're in any kind of job and you're getting paid a decent amount of money and you're putting the effort in and you're working long hours, what is available for you now to actually build your financial wealth, right? If you're an employee, right? Because you're rightly saying, whether it's crypto, shares, property, they're in the same category now. So you would turn around and I would say that's the one bit that I think if you're a young person now, you'll be sitting there thinking to yourself, you know what, I've been hard done by, because other people had this vehicle that they were able to actually make money while they were sleeping, earning money while they're working and channeling it there. At the moment, it's unclear how these people will actually do it. I suppose that many will open up businesses, right? John McGrath's been a person that had invested his life from a young age in business. So that is an option, but that's also become an issue, because if you read all the detail in that, there's concerns that people that are setting up companies aren't going to be able to get the benefits that they used to be. And there is a lot of entrepreneurs that are looking to go elsewhere. They're talking about Singapore and all sorts of countries. So that is a concern. We might end up losing good talent in this country.
Well, I think that, John is a perfect example of someone who had high aspiration, high work ethic in terms of being able to do that. And again, delivered on that and has created a signature business in the country. So John, to you, one of the great things about our country is aspiration, right? We want to be able to have a spirit where that if we work hard and we do really well, that we can succeed, and we can see that, from a financial point of view. Do you have anything further to add about, whether you're worried about that or whether you think that opportunity still exists in our country?
Oh, look, I think it's changing before our very eyes, Ben, and AI is the unanswered question as to what companies and what roles are going to continue to exist beyond the next few years. And I don't have kids, I have dachshunds, but I would be worried if I had kids about trying to help them, guide them in the direction of a career that's actually going to have longevity. And someone I know the other day has a young child who's starting in law. And they said, I'm worried because I think lawyers are going to be replaced in the main by AI. And they then went on to tell me that they'd just done their last 2 contracts just through AI, and they didn't even use a lawyer that they normally would have gone to. So, yeah, I think it's interesting times, but I have great belief in human nature and people's resilience and people's flexibility, not just in investing in property, but redefining, how they run their lives and their careers and so forth. And I'm sure many other jobs will be created off the back of AI as well. So, I'm an eternal optimist.
You are.
And believer in we will find a way forward.
I think you both are. I mean, that eternal optimism, thinking with a positive mindset and an abundant mindset hopefully puts you in the right settings. And we do need the government to obviously get those settings right to encourage investment. What we can't have is governments basically, spending money to keep everyone employed and continue to going into further and further debt, because obviously off the back of that, we get higher taxes.
Ben, I agree. So if I could just add,
Yes,
that I agree 100% with Tom's disappointment in this not being a reformative, significant budget. And I think we have lacked a lot of leadership in our country and I'm somewhat party agnostic. I actually voted for Labor, but I'm somewhat disappointed in what they've delivered or not delivered. But, we should be one of the IT epicenters of the planet.
Yes.
And we should be an incredible educational and health leader in the world. And we do okay in those areas, but we're not probably world leaders. And I just think our governments have had a chance, and they haven't really acted to develop some incredible expertise where Australians can outshine everyone else on the planet. We've relied on, hospitality and, a little bit of that type of stuff, tourism. And I just think it's a disappointment that we need more leadership from the government, both sides.
Yes.
I mean, either of them are doing well.
Yep.
And whether it's Labor, Liberal, One Nation, or whoever it is, but get serious. This is an incredible country with more resources, and I'm not just talking about mineral, but that's one of them,
Yep.
than anyone else in the world. And now the tyranny of distance that was once a problem is now an advantage for us because we're kind of a little bit away from some of the disasters that are happening elsewhere in the world. So, the only message I'd love to send, through us here today, through everyone, and certainly to the government is, don't waste the opportunity of making Australia the best country in the world. And they've wasted the budget last night, in my opinion. I think it's rounding errors and it's tweaking and it's collecting a bit more, but it's nothing transformative. And it's about time they undertake some transformative actions, I think.
Oh, well, look, productivity was meant to be the key focus of the roundtable and all of those things. I read a couple of weeks back that, and I'm not saying let's hold America to a gold standard in everything that they do, but for the biggest economy in the world to be producing the productivity, and initially for a decade there, they didn't believe the data, but now they've assessed that data and it's legitimate. Like they are producing productivity per worker better than any other country in the Western world. China's again off the charts in terms of this because of their technology first mindset. I mean, it reminds me of the Japanese back in the 80s and that when they just took off and had that prosperous period. At the end of the day, prosperity comes from economic activity and giving people an opportunity to do that, and not through government regulation, red tape, and all of those types of things. So I appreciate, John, your honesty in that point. Your voice carries an incredible amount of weight in that area. So I think, yes, we can do better and we must do better, and we can't just live off the natural resources, our biggest resource. And this is an amazing country. We're blessed with, effectively low corruption more often than not, a potential stable government and political system. Let's take advantage of that, but let's also think in abundant ways, and let's get busy getting busy as part of that. So, gents, last question for both of you. I'm going to crystal ball out. We now know, effectively what the demand supply story looks like in this country. We're going to have still really struggle with supply over the course of the next couple of years. We've got immigration coming in. We've now got some demand story playing around with these sort of, property taxes. What's your outlook for the remainder of the year? And when do you see things, potentially improving if, again, off the back of higher interest rates as well? Tom, I'll start with you and then we'll finish off with John.
So apart from the budget, obviously, if you're asking about real estate in the future, there's more than the budget. There's obviously the war, and everyone's hoping that the guy just comes to his senses and just finishes that soon. And then we've also got interest rates, and they like they're going to be prolonged, because there's nothing to indicate that rates are going to get down to that 2 to 3% band for quite some time. So I expect rates to actually stay up and maybe keep going up a little bit. So that says to me that we probably have headwinds. Whether that suggests recession. Recession is defined as having two negative quarters. Like probably this quarter is going to be negative. Will the second quarter then be negative? But echoing John's thoughts, and I've actually worked, and John has worked, and I'm sure you have, Ben, through even recession markets. They're worse in people's heads than what they really are. Like you get by, people still transact. My final comments, Ben, would be that all we've got to do is to make sure that this country doesn't make the hero job, working as a government employee, the hero job. We've got to be supportive of people in private enterprise, people that want to take risk, people that are entrepreneurs, people that are creative, or otherwise we're going to end up having a workforce of people that lacks innovation and will fall behind as a country.
Yeah, I think the property market is in for a challenging 6 to 12 months. The data that's coming out at the moment, in my opinion, and I'm not sure why, but it does not reflect the reality of what's happening out there. I'm hearing 0.4% here and 0.5%. The real estate market certainly on the east coast of Australia, excluding Queensland, which is still travelling well, in Victoria, Tasmania, and ACT and New South Wales, we're down 5 to 7.5% values across most price ranges, and I think we're going to be down another few percent before it stabilises. So I think it's going to be a tough period, as you guys have said, cost of living, interest rates, Middle East conflict, budgetary issues. All these things are colliding at in a perfect storm. But I think we will be, and I guess it's going to be a tough 6 months. That doesn't mean it's disastrous. It just means, and because a lot of the time, I heard it the other day, I think it was Mark Boris's podcast, the property market's given back the last 12% growth, but it had 3 years growth before that. So it ain't that bad.
Yeah.
And if you look at it less emotionally and doom and gloom, and you say, okay, well, you're right. Many properties in Sydney, for example, they're up 45%. They're now down 7%. They're still up 37%. So, again, we'll find a path forward. I hope the people that have to get out sooner, though, because I think it'll get a bit worse before it gets better. And if people are under pressure, and we're starting to have people call us up, Ben, that are saying the banks are coming down on us and we got to get out fast. And we haven't seen that for a long time. So
yeah.
I think, just take the price, find an agent that you trust, ask them what it's really worth, not the dream price, and get out, and then just, sort of look to reinvest whenever you can. But I think the next 6 to 12 months will have some challenges for the property.
And Ben, as Murdoch used to say, never waste a crisis. That for a small group of people, this is the upgrader's opportunity of a lifetime. Because if we're saying a principal place of residence remains the last tax haven in Australia, all of a sudden, those houses. I actually spoke to a couple of McGrath people this morning, and I spoke to Rubenstein this morning, and Gavin Rubenstein at Ray White, or TRG, said to me, there has been an increase of people looking at the higher end properties. So I'm actually thinking there's a lot of people that are thinking, hey, my house is 500 grand less. The one I'm buying is 1 mil less. This is the perfect upgrade opportunity. So there is that happening as well.
And I can also validate that down here in the Melbourne market, in the sense that there's been a lot of pent-up demand from an owner-occupied point of view, because values haven't moved in that that upper quartile, right? And so if you're thinking about at the moment in that 3 to 5 million price range, there's not a lot of activity, but we're now starting to see people, I'm going to watch this for a little bit of time to see whether I can get in. So I do, I'm Bryce and I have been consistent in all of our messaging for the since 2015 in doing the pod, that we believe that you should get into the market when you can afford to get into the market and hold for the long term, right? And we know that property prices over the long term continue to grow as long as the economic activity and the area that you've got your land and the property continues to grow as well. So to your point, Tom, and John, you always understand this, that in adverse times, there are times where it's opportune for others. And I think there might be people who might be in a position where they can take advantage of this particular cycle to add to their portfolio or to potentially upgrade their principal place of residence. So I suspect we'll be looking at that in 36 months' time from now and saying, did that play itself out? And then as those economic conditions improve, and I'm now on record as saying a few weeks ago that if this was a trading market, I would be long Melbourne, in terms of the next 10 decade or so, and I'd probably be short regional in some of those commutable markets. Unfortunately, the non-commutable markets, the more regional markets, because of the impetus of the buying and the shallowness in the market. So it's definitely going to be an interesting time, gentlemen. And I just want to also publicly acknowledge you for our 600 episode. You've both been an incredible inspiration to myself, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of Bryce in terms of the work that you do, the information that you share. You don't hold anything back. You're absolutely legends of our industry, and it's just a complete honour of mine to be able to interview you both on the 600 episode of the Property Couch Show. Thank you, gentlemen. You're amazing. And
Ben, before we go, just so I can mention from Tom and I and all our listeners to you guys, you've done an incredible job with your podcast. So it's our honour to be a part of this. Your audience is far bigger than ours, so we've got a lot to learn. And Tom, they started a month after us, and they're up to 600 episodes, and we're at about 250. So perhaps we need to reinvent our podcast.
Yeah, maybe that's where we're going to put our energy post-budget. Come up with.
Thanks for having us. We're really appreciative.
No worries, and to Troy as well for obviously being the third leg of the stool. You guys are amazing, and again, if you ever need to just have some really critical thinking and process information, these guys problem solve better than anyone I know in terms of how they lift your momentum, get you focused on the things that matter. So thank you both, gentlemen. It's been an absolute treat to have a chat with you today.
See you guys. See you, Ben. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
See you, Tommy.
Well, there you have it. It was an absolute honour, as I mentioned just a moment ago, to interview John and also have Tom back on. I mean, there's a lot to learn from John's story. First of all, dealing with adversity, pivoting, the collapsed lung, and then making good. So that's showing that resolve and that character to push through. So there's a real tick there in terms of the determination that John showed. He also focused on process knowledge building, so being very, very knowledgeable about his specialisation and his skills, and also then building that trust, being able to establish and executing on that trust. So do what you said you were going to do. So they are core values that will put anyone in good stead in life in general, but also in any pursuits that they look to achieve. So again, John is a credit to himself, building obviously a very successful business, but also helping so many Australians and helping the industry at large, as they both do now, Tom and John. Now, if you are interested in real estate, then the $1 Million Agent podcast, I would recommend you take a listen to that as well. But yes, for our 600 show, I couldn't think of anyone better than having John and Tom on the show. So thank you, gentlemen, for helping us celebrate our 600th episode. Of course, to our community, the show will go on. We'll continue to work hard in terms of delivering you the latest and greatest information, as well as making sure you don't stray from the fundamentals of long-term value performance in property in terms of where that lives. And we'll continue to articulate that to you in terms of hopefully the next couple of 100 shows as we do our work that we do, because it's you that we love to serve. It's an absolute joy and privilege for us, including obviously I'm speaking on behalf of Bryce and the team and our new Couch Crew team also, who are helping us for the last few episodes, and will continue to do that. So from our hearts to yours, we thank you very much for being part of our community over this journey. So until next week, always remember, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. Now over to you, Opti, for some of those other fun facts.
Thanks, Ben. All right, here we go. Across 600 episodes, the Property Couch has delivered roughly 27,000 minutes of content. That's more than 450 hours, or around 18 to 19 straight days of non-stop property, finance, and money conversations. Over the journey, we've welcomed 156 individual guests to the couch, with plenty becoming regulars, answered approximately 469 listener questions, and shared over a decade of insights with the community. And in that time, we've also unpacked more than 100 RBA cash rate decisions, covering cuts, holds, emergency COVID moves, and the latest rate hiking cycle. We've seen the cash rate fall to a historic low of 0.10% during the pandemic, before climbing back to 4.35% today. And while 600 episodes is a milestone we're incredibly proud of, the real story has always been the community that's grown around this couch. So from all of us, thank you for being part of the journey. And here's to the next chapter. Hey folks, Opti here, your smart money sidekick inside Moorr. Just one quick thing before we sign off. If you're new to the Property Couch community, welcome. One quick tip to help you get the most value from the show. Our first 20 episodes cover the foundations we build on every week. And yes, listening on 1.5 speed is totally acceptable. If you're short on time, download our free binge guide. It distills those episodes into one easy read with heaps of visual diagrams, alongside free tools inside Moorr, your all-in-one financial home, to help you organize your money and plan your next best move. Check out all the links in our show description. And just a quick reminder before you go, anything we cover on this podcast is general in nature. It's not considered to be financial advice, and we certainly recommend that you seek out professional advice before making any financial decisions. Once again, everything mentioned is linked in the show description. Ready when you are. Catch you next week.